Good day, everyone. So, this is another discussion in our subject to child and adolescent learners and learning principles. So, for today's discussion, we will talk about the human development, meaning concepts, and approaches. So, I have here pictures of a 7-year-old Nashel and a 3-year-old Ken. Each one is a bundle of possibilities. So, we will describe what they were before birth, their point of origin, and who they will possibly be after birth unto adulthood. So, let us first discuss the traditional and lifespan development. So, if you believe that Nikki and Ken will show extensive change from birth to adolescence, little or no change in adulthood, and decline in late old age, your approach to development is traditional. So again, when we say traditional, the change from birth to adolescence or little or no change in adulthood. So when we say lifespan development, if you believe that even in adulthood, developmental change takes place as it does during childhood. So your approach must be a lifespan development. So again, the difference between traditional and lifespan development is when we are talking about traditional, we have just little or no change in adulthood and decline in late old age. So when we say lifespan development, the adulthood developmental change takes place as it does during childhood. So your approach must be lifespan development. So what are the characteristics of human development from a lifespan perspectives? So these are the lifespan development characteristics. So number one is development is lifelong. So it does not end in adulthood. So just like Ken and Nashel will continue developing even in adulthood. Second one is development is plastic. So when we say plasticity, it refers to the potential for change. So development is possible throughout the lifespan. So no one is too old to learn. So always remember that no one is too old to learn. So there is no such thing as I am too old for that. So neither Ken nor Nashel will be too old to learn something. So, aging is associated with declines in certain intellectual abilities. So, this declines can be prevented or reduced. So, in one research study, the reasoning abilities of older adults were improved through retaining. Number three is development is multidimensional. So development consists of biological, cognitive, and social-emotional dimensions. So development as a process is complex because it is the product of biological, cognitive, and social-emotional processes. So when we say biological processes, it involves changes in the individual's physical nature. So the brains of Nashel and Ken develop. So they will gain height and weight. They will experience hormonal changes when they reach the period of puberty. So, and also the cardiovascular decline as they approach late adulthood. So, all this show the common biological process in development. Next is development is relatively orderly. So, Nashel and Ken will learn to sit, crawl, when walk before they can run. So, the muscular control of the trunk and the arms comes earlier as compared to the hands and fingers. So, this is what we call the proximodistal pattern. So, the muscular control in trunk and arms comes earlier as compared to the hands and fingers. While on the cephalocaudal pattern, so during the infancy, the greatest growth always occurs at the top. The head with physical growth in size, weight, and gradually working way down from the top to bottom. So for example, the neck, shoulders, the middle trunk, and so on. So this is what we call the cephalocaudal pattern. So these development patterns are common to Nashel and Ken. So still under the development is multidimensional. Development takes place gradually. So Nishal and Ken won't develop into pimply teenagers overnight. So it takes years before they become one. So in fact, that's the way of nature. So the bud does not blossom suddenly, the seed does not germinate overnight, while some changes occur in a flash of insight. More often, it takes weeks, months, or years for a person to undergo changes that result in the display of developmental characteristics. So the cognitive processes involve changes in the individual's thought, intelligence, and language. So just like Nashel and Ken develop from a mere sound to a word becoming two words. So the two words becoming a sentence. So they would move on to memorizing their first prayer, singing the national anthem that we usually say Bayang Magiliw in every flag ceremony, to imagining what it would be like to be a teacher or a pilot, playing chess and solving complex math problem. All this reflect the role of cognitive processes in development. We have also the social emotional processes. So this includes changes in the individual's relationships with other people, changes in emotions, and changes in personality. So as babies, Nashel and Ken responded with a sweet smile when affectionately touched and frowned when displeased, and even showed temper tantrums when they could not get or do what they wanted. From aggressive children, they may develop into a fine lady and a gentleman or otherwise. So, depending on a myriad of factors. So, they may fall in love and get inspired for life, or may end up betrayed, deserted, and desperate afterwards. So, all this reflect the role of social emotional processes in development. So, these biological, cognitive, and social emotional processes are inextricably intertwined. So, while these processes are studied separately, the effect of one process or factor on a person's development is not isolated from the other process. So, if Ken and Nashel were undernourished and troubled by the thought of father and mother about to separate, they could not concentrate on their studies and consequently would fail and repeat. So, as a consequence, they may lose face and drop out of school, revert to illiteracy, become unskilled, unemployed, and so on and so forth. So, these are the biological process that affects the cognitive process, which in turn affects the social emotional process. Number four is we have the development is contextual. So individuals are changing beings in a changing world. So individuals respond to and act on context. So this context include the individual's biological makeup, physical environment, cognitive processes, historical, social, and cultural context. So in the case of Nashels and Ken's biological makeup, social and cultural context may vary and therefore make them develop differently from each other. Last one is the development involves growth, maintenance, and regulation. So the growth, maintenance, and regulations are three goals of human development. So the goals of individuals vary among developmental stages. For instance, as individuals reach middle and late adulthood, concern with growth gets into the backstage, while maintenance and regulation take the center stage. So after the human development, meaning concepts and approaches, let us now proceed discussing the stages of development. So for every developmental stage, there is an expected developmental task. So what happens when the expected development tasks are not achieved at the corresponding developmental stage? How can you help children achieve this developmental task? So let us now first um, So let us now first discussing the prenatal development. So when you might think of child development as something that begins during infancy, the prenatal period is also considered an important part of the developmental process. So the prenatal development is a time of remarkable change that helps set the stage for future psychological development. So the brain So the brain develops over the course of the prenatal period, but it will continue to go through more changes during the early years of childhood. So there are three stages of prenatal development. So these are the germinal, the embryonic, and the fetal stages. So the first 2 weeks after conceptions are known as germinal. So the third to 8 weeks is known as the embryonic period, and the time from the ninth week until birth is known as the fetal period. So let us now first discuss the germinal stage of prenatal development. So the germinal stage begins at conception. So when the sperm and egg cell unite in one of the two fallopian tubes, the fertilized egg is called the zygote just a few hours after the conception. So the single cell zygotes begin making journey down the fallopian tube to the uterus. So the cell divisions begins approximately 24 to 36 hours after conception. So through the process of mitosis, the zygote first divides into two cells, then into fourth cell, 16, and so on. So a significant number of zygotes never progress past this early part of cell division, with as many as half of all zygotes surviving less than 2 weeks. So once the eighth cell has been reached, so the cells begin to differentiate and take on certain characteristics that will determine the type of cells that will eventually become. As the cells multiply, they will also separate into two distinctive masses. So and um the outer cells will eventually become the placenta, and while the inner cells form the embryo. So cell division continues at rapid rate during the approximately week-long journey from the fallopian tube to uterus wall. So the cells develop into what is known as blastocyst. So the blastocyst is made up of three layers, each one of which develops into different structures. So we have the ectoderm, that is the skin and the nervous system. We have the endoderm, that is the digestive and respiratory systems, and the mesoderm, the muscle and the skeletal system. So finally, the blastocyst arrives at the uterus, attaches to the uterine wall. So this the process known as the implantation. So the implantation occurs when the cells nestle into the uterine lining and rupture tiny blood vessels. So the connective web of blood vessels and membranes that form between them will provide nourishment for the developing being for the next 9 months. So implantation is not always an automatic and surefire process. So when the implantation is successful, hormonal changes halt the normal menstrual cycle and cause a whole host of physical changes. So for some people, activities they previously enjoyed, such as smoking and drinking alcohol or coffee, may become less palatable. So possibly part of the nature's way of protecting the growing life inside them. So after the germinal stage, we have the embryonic development. So I'm sorry to put the letter N here. So at this point, the mass of cells is now known as an embryo. So the beginning of the third week after the conception marks the start of the embryonic periods, a time when the mass of cells become distinct as a human. So the embryonic stage plays an important role in the development of the brain. So approximately 4 weeks after conception, the neural tube forms. So this tube will later develop into the central nervous system, including the spinal cord and the brain. So the neural tube begins to form along with an area known as the neural plate. So the earliest signs of development of the neural tube are the emergence of two ridges that form along each side of the neural plate. So over the next few days, more ridges form and fold inward until a hollow tube is formed. So when this tube is fully formed, cells begin to form near the center. So the tube begins to close and brain vesicles form. So these vesicles will eventually develop into parts of the brain, including the structures of the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. So around the fourth week, the head begins to form. So quickly followed by the eyes, the nose, the ears, and the mouth, and the blood vessels that will become the heart start to pulse. So during the fifth week, buds that will form the arms and the legs appear. So by the 8th week of development, the embryo has all of the basic organs and parts except those of the sex organs. So at this point, the embryo weighs just 1 gram, is about 1 inch in length. So by the end of the embryonic period, the basic structures of the brain and central nervous system have been established. So at this point, the basic structure of the peripheral nervous system is also defined. So the production of neurons, the brain cells begins around the 42nd after conception. So when neurons form, they migrate to different areas of the brains once they have reached the correct location. So they begin to form connections with other neural cells, establishing the rudimentarity neural networks. Last is the fetal development. So one cell differentiation is mostly complete. So the embryo enters the next stage and become known as the fetus. So the fetal period of prenatal development marks more important changes in the brain. So this period of development begins during the 9th week and lasts until birth. So this stage is marked by amazing change and growth. So the early body systems and structures established in the embryonic stage continue to develop. So the neural tube develops into the brain, and spinal cord and neurons continue to form. So once these neurons have formed, they begin to migrate to their correct location, so that the synapses or the connections between neurons also begin to develop. So between the 9 and 12 week of gestation, reflexes begin to merge. So the fetus begin to make reflexive motions with its arms and legs. So during the 3rd month of gestation, the sex organs, all parts of the body will be formed. So at this point, the fetus weighs around 3 ounces. So the fetus continues to grow in both weight and length. So although the majority of the physical growth occurs in the later stage of pregnancy. So the end of the 3rd month also marks the end of the first trimester of pregnancy. So during the second trimesters or the months 4 through 6, the heartbeat grows stronger and other body systems become further developed. So the fingernails, the hair, the eyelashes, and toenails form also. So perhaps most noticeably, the fetus increases about 6 times in size. So what's going on inside the brain during this important period of prenatal development? So of course, the brain and the central nervous system also become more responsive during the second trimester. So during the period from 7 months until birth, the fetus continues to develop, put on weight, and prepare for life outside the womb. So the lungs begin to expand and contract, preparing the muscles for breathing. So I prepared here a short video clip showing the prenatal development. So for further understanding and information.
Prenatal development is the time after conception when a baby forms from a single cell. It's a time of remarkable change, occurring in 3 main stages: the germal stage, the embryonic period, and the fetal period. The germal stage begins when the egg becomes fertilized with sperm. This single cell journeys down the fallopian tube to the uterus and begins to divide. As the cells rapidly multiply, the outer cells eventually become placenta, while the inner cells form the embryo. The cells develop into what is known as a blastocyst. Once at the uterus, the blastocyst attaches to the uterine wall through a process known as implantation. The 3rd week after conception, the mass of cells become an embryo. Over the next month, the embryo becomes distinctly human. The neural tube forms, later developing into the central nervous system. The head begins to form, followed by the eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. And buds that will form the arms and legs appear. During the 9th week and through birth, the embryo becomes known as a fetus. This stage is marked by amazing change and growth. and important changes in the brain take place. Between the ninth and 12th week, the fetus begins to make reflexive motions with its arms and legs. During the third month, the sex organs start to differentiate, and by the end of the third month, all parts of the body are formed. Like the body, brain development does not end at birth. In fact, between birth and preschool, the brain quadruples in size.
So after the prenatal development, we have the second stage, which is the infancy. So the sleep, cry, eat, repeat, that is the life of an infant. So the newborn infants actually do spend most of their time in these three pursuits. So however, by the end of their first year, they have greatly expanded their repertoire. By their first birthday, infants are typically starting to walk and talk, and they are spending about as much time awake as asleep. So clearly, infancy is a time of tremendous change. So by defining infancy, it refers to the first year of life after birth. So an infant um, defined as a human being between birth and the first birthday. So the term baby is usually considered synonymous with an infant. So, although it is commonly applied to the young of other animals as well as humans, human infants seem weak and helpless at birth. But they are actually born with a surprising range of abilities. So, most of their senses are quite well developed, and they can also communicate their needs by crying. So, like this 3-day old baby in the picture. So during their first year, infants develop many other abilities, some of which are described in this concept. So they also grow more rapidly during their first year than they will at any other time during the rest of their life. So a newborn infant is called a neonate up until the first 4 weeks after birth. So I neonate, like the crying baby picture, does not usually look like the plump, chubby cheek, gerber baby that most people envision when they hear the term baby. So the status of a newborn, we use the apgar test. So the apgar test is um executed to the baby immediately after a birth. So this is a simple test called an apgar test. So this is administered to an infant to evaluate its transition from the uterus to the outside world. So the newborn is assessed on each of 5 easy to measure traits, and for each trait is given a score of 0, 1, or 2, where 0 is the worst value and 2 is the best. So after an infant is assessed on each trait, the values of all 5 traits are added together to yield the UpGuard test. So the highest possible score is 10, but a score of 7 or higher is considered normal. So a score of 4 or 6 is considered fairly low, and a score of 3 or lower is considered critically low. So the purpose of the UpGuard test is to determine quickly whether a newborn needs immediately medical care. So it is not designed to predict long-term health issues. So this newborn infant with the vernix still coating her forehead and shoulders is being given an UpGuard test right after birth. So the stethoscope on her chest is being used to detect and measure her heart rate. So this is one of the 5 traits that will be assessed for her UpGuard score. So the 5 traits that are assessed in an UpGuard test is listed here in our figure. So the table shows how the acronym UpGuard can be used to help remember the 5 traits. So we have here the appearance, the pulse, the grimace, the activity, and the respiration. So these are the traits, the score, the corresponding score of 0, 1, and 2. Next is we have also called the umbilical cord. So in umbilical cord, is cut right after birth, leaving a short stub that will weather away and form the navel within a month. So the umbilical stub will dry out, darken, and spontaneously fall off within about 3 weeks of birth. So this will become the navel after it fully heals. How about the size and growth of the neonate? So the birth normally ranges between 46 and 56 centimeter or 18 and 22 inches with an average of 51 centimeter or the 20 inches. So the birth weight of a full term infant normally ranges from 2.5 to 4.5 kilogram with an average of 3.4 kilograms. So for preterm infants, these numbers are likely to be lower because these infants have had a shorter period of prenatal growth. So during the first week following birth, it is normal for the weight of a neonate to decrease by about 3 to 7% of the birth weight. So, for example, a baby born at an average weight of 3.4 kilogram might weigh only 3.2 kilogram by the seventh day after birth. So, this loss of weight is normal because of the result of the resorption and urination of the fluid that initially fills the lungs. So, a contributing factor may be a delay of a few days before feeding becomes well established, which is also normal. After the first week, a healthy neonate should start to gain up to 20 grams per day. So, how about the neonate senses? So, in senses, some senses in newborns are already relatively well developed. Other senses are still immature and need to develop further after birth. So, sense of touch in the neonate have well-developed sense of touch and they usually respond positively to soft stroking and cuddling. So gentle rocking back and forth, massages, and warm baths are also positively received by neonates and they may calm a crying infant. Newborns can often comfort themselves by sucking their thumb, finger, or pacifier. In the vision in the neonate, newborn's vision is not yet fully developed. So both the retinas and the part of the brain involved in vision are still immature. So most newborns are only able to focus on objects that are directly in front of their face and about 46 centimeters away. So however, this is sufficient for the infant to see the mother's face as well as the areola and nipple. When a newborn is not feeding, sleeping, or crying, it is generally starting at objects within its visual range. So, usually, anything that is shiny, has sharp contrasting colors, or has a complex pattern will catch an infant's eye. So, however, the neonate, like the infant here in the picture, has a clear preference for looking at human's faces above all else. So the newborns have limited color perception. So about three-quarters of newborns can distinguish red, but fewer than half can distinguish green, yellow, or blue. Color perceptions, however, improves quickly after birth. So a newborn infant also lacks depth perception, so which is the ability to see in three dimensions. So this ability starts to develop only after an infant becomes mobile later in infancy. So it continues to develop throughout early childhood. And hearing in the neonate is well developed at birth. So newborns usually respond from more readily to female than male voices. And the sound of voices, especially the mother's voice, may have a soothing effect on the infant. So sounds that the infant heard before birth, such as the parent's breathing and heartbeat, are also comforting to the newborn. So loud or sudden noises, on the other hand, are likely to startle and frighten the newborn. Next is the taste and smell in the neonate. So the newborns can respond to different tastes, including sweet, sour, bitter, and salty taste. So they generally show a preference for sweet taste. They also show a preference for the smell of foods that their mother ate regularly during pregnancy. So presumably, this occurs because the amniotic fluid changes taste with the different foods eaten by the mother. Newborns have a number of instinctive behaviors or what we call the reflexes that help them survive. So crying is one of the examples. So it is instinctive to newborn infants who may use it to express a variety of feelings such as hunger, discomfort, overstimulation, or loneliness. So the need to suckle is also instinctive. So they have sucking reflex that allows them to extract milk from the mother's nipple or from the nipple on a bottle right after birth. So in addition, infants have an instinctive behavior known as the rooting reflex that helps them find the nipple by touch. So when an infant's cheek is stroked or it rubs against an object, the baby automatically turns its head in that direction to find the nipple. So infants are born with other reflexes that aid them in maintaining close physical contact with their caregiver. So these reflexes help them hold onto the caregiver so they are less likely to fall, and also they can satisfy their basic need for constant physical contact. So two of these reflexes are what we call the moro reflex and the grasping reflex. So when we say moro reflex, it occurs um, in response to a sudden loss of support when the infant feels as though it is falling. So it is an instinctive behavior that is normally present in an infant from birth up until to 3 or 4 months of age. So it involves three distinct components. So suddenly spreading out arms, bringing the arms back in toward the body, and usually crying. So if the baby really were falling, these motions might help it reach out and grab its mother or another caregiver. Next is we have the grasping reflex. So this is the instinctive grasping of finger or other object that is placed in the palm of an infant. So this reflex actually arises before birth and is present until an infant is about 5 or 6 months of age. So it may help an infant grip and hang on to the mother or another caregiver. So the grasping reflex in this 4-month-old infant gives it a surprisingly strong grip. So this reflex is already present at birth. So after the infancy, we have what we call the next stage, which is the early childhood that ranges to 3 to 5 years. So in early childhood, our greatest untold poem was being only 4 years old. So we skipped, played, and ran all day long, never in our lives so busy becoming something we had not quite grasped yet. Who knew our thoughts which work up into small mythologies all our own. So our thoughts and images and drawings took wings. So the blossoms of our heart no wind could touch. So our small world widened as we discover new refuges and new people. So when we say I, we meant something totally unique, not to be confused with any other. Next is we have the middle and late childhood that ranges to 6 to 12 years old. In middle and late childhood, we were on a different plane, belonging to a generation and a feeling properly our own. It is the wisdom of human development that at no other time we are more ready to learn than at the end of early childhood's periods of expansive imagination. Our thirst was to know and to understand. Our parents continued to cradle our lives, but our growth was also being shaped by successive tours of friends. We did not think much about the future of the past but enjoyed the present. Next is adolescence ranging 13 to 18 years old. So, in no order of things was adolescence. So, the simple time of life for us. So, we clothed ourselves with rainbows and went brave as the zodiac, flashing from one end of the world to the other. So, we tried on one face after another, searching for a face of our own. So, we wanted our parents to understand us and hope they would give up the privilege of understanding them. So we wanted to fly, but found that first we had to learn to stand and walk and climb and dance. In our most pimply and awkward moments, we become acquainted with sex. We played fiercely at adult games, but were confined to a society of our own peers. So our generation was the fragile cable by which the best and the worst of our parents' generation was transmitted to the present. So in the end, there were two but lasting bequests our parents could leave us, one being roots, the other wings. Next is the early adulthood that ranges to 19 to 29 years old. Early adulthood is a time for work and a time for love, sometimes leaving little time for anything else. For some of us, finding our place in adult society and committing to a more stable life take longer than we imagine. We still ask ourselves who we are and wonder if it isn't enough just to be. Our dreams continue and our thoughts are bold, but at some point, we became more pragmatic. Sex and love are powerful passions in our lives, at times angels of light, at other times of torment. And we possibly will never know the love of our parents until we become parents ourselves. Next is the middle adulthood, ranges 30 to 60 years old. In middle adulthood, what we have been forms what we will be. For some of us, middle age is such a foggy place, a time when we need to discover what we are running for and to and why. We compare our life with what we vowed to make. In the middle age, more time stretches before us and some evaluations have to be made. However, reluctantly, as the young old polarity greets us with a special force, we need to join the daring of youth with the discipline of age in a way that does justice to both. As middle aged adults, we come to sense that the generation of living things pass in a short while and like runners hand on the torch of life. Next is the late adulthood, 61 years and above. The rhythm and meaning of human development eventually wend their way to late adulthood, when each of us stands alone at the heart of the earth and suddenly it is evening. We shed the leaves of youth and are stripped by the winds of time down to the truth. We learn that life is lived forward but understood backward. We trace the connection between the end and the beginning of life and try to figure out what this whole show is about before it is over. Ultimately, we come to know that we are what survives of us. So that is all for the stages of development. So again, we have the um, prenatal development, we have the infancy, we have the early childhood, the middle and late childhood, the adolescence, early adulthood, the middle adulthood, and the late adulthood. So, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you learned something with regards to our discussion. So, see you on our next discussion. So, please finish the video because I left your performance activity. So, thank you, see you, and God bless. So for your performance activity, so again, this is our format. Answer the following questions. This is consist of 40 points. Put your answer in the comment section below by following the format. So you have to put your name, your block or cluster, and your answer. So the deadline of submission of answer is only on July 25, 2023, 8 p.m. only. So number one question is discuss the meaning of the quotation beneath related to the stages of development. So, who are you? Asked the caterpillar. Alice replied rather shyly, I hardly know, sir. I hardly know, sir. Just at the present, at least, I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I must have changed several times since then. By Lewis Carroll. Number two is reflect on your early childhood, middle, and late childhood days. Were you able to acquire the developmental tasks expected of early, middle, late childhood, and adolescence? So, what facilitated your acquisition of the ability to perform such tasks? Write your reflections.